Hey y'all. All right. So before I really get into this, I do want to preface this with the information or the opinion rather that I consider myself a healer. I'm not actively doing readings. I'm not actively doing like any kind of formal like public healing, but I do consider myself a healer of sorts. I consider myself spiritual, and so I'm not talking about anything in this video with malice, but more I'm sharing my experience. Um, and hopefully it can bring awareness to the targeted audience. So I really wanted to talk about my experience working in wellness, the wellness world, as far as like the corporate wellness world. And when I say corporate, I just mean white, and I mean businesses that are Eurocentric, and just my experience and how I felt working. Actually, I still work for a wellness. I work for another wellness place now that is owned by a white woman. But the environment there is a little bit more people of color friendly. My reservations are still there. So, I mean, I guess there's. All right. So, I find myself looking for positions in administration, in PR, social media managing, and that sort of thing, because that's just what, number one, I'm good at. Number two, what I have experience in. So I'm always trying to find non-linear. Oh, that's so loud. That's mad loud. Yeah, I'm always trying to find ascending roles that kind of are building constantly and on like my skill sets and what I already have. So I find myself working in wellness spaces that are pro women, pro birth life, and that sort of thing. But with that being said, those spaces tend to be white, not because there aren't black healing spaces, but because that just ends up being where I go, or the places that hire me. It tends to be, and this is not always the case, but it tends to be that black healing spaces rely a lot more on community, and a lot of the times, like especially like the ones where I live in Brooklyn, they look for people that are willing to contribute their time, and volunteer their time. And while I love the idea of that, I'm a single mother. Single mother. I'm actually dating, but I'm dating someone. But essentially, I'm providing for my child, um, and it's just not feasible. Also, this is why I stopped really doing doula work the way that I wanted to, because the access to clientele has been different for me, coming from the doula organization that I was affiliated with. They focus a lot on low to middle, no to low income women, and the system that's in place for that isn't really supportive of women really being able to support themselves, and then also support the women who are like actually in desperate need of that support. I digress. I basically found myself in a lot of white spaces. I found myself giving cues and tips to white women in regards to wellness. So I work at this one place, and I no longer work there, obviously. I kind of phased myself out and then kind of got the boot, um, semi-intentionally. And basically, the biggest qualm I have about white spaces and white healing and spirituality, honestly, in general, is the fact that at its core, The spiritual practices that are in place come from indigenous cultures. And that's always how it's been. Now, it doesn't matter what you believe in. It doesn't matter what your religion is. Whatever book that you believe in, a lot of the practices come from ancient civilizations of Black and brown people. And so the biggest problem I've had, and the biggest conflict that I've had as far as conflict of interest, is finding myself making money in these spaces, finding ways to be profitable, and trying to get past the contradiction it is to work with people who are benefiting off of superficially reiterating the things that they know about spirituality and healing. I often find that there's these places called wellness centers, and it's like, why are you called the wellness center if you're not truly concerned about wellness? This particular place I worked at focused a lot on women. They did like infrared sauna there, which to me, again, like, I think this idea of wellness and not orienting yourself around truly helping a total community, especially if you have the access, is a farce. I feel like you can't call yourself a wellness center and not consider low-income people, not focus on women of color and be a feminist. I think there's just this natural thing, and I don't want to like focus and say that it's just white women, but it tends to be that there are a lot of white women who claim that they care about equality, that claim that they care about feminism, and out of their entire staff, there's only one person that's a person of color. Or like if they do hire people of color, they're not giving them the same pay rate, or that they're not offering them the same benefits, or they're taking away benefits. And it's just kind of annoying at the end of the day. One of the main focuses they had was providing an eating disorder group. And while it's commendable, again, like I think the things that we're focused on, like while I think it's fair to, create things that reflect your struggle, I think like the fact that there are so many women of color that have eating disorders but don't even have the luxury to reflect on the fact that it's an eating disorder, and like that's something that is completely like hummed over by the greater eating disorder community is kind of crazy. It was interesting to me because I'm not saying I formally have an eating disorder. I've never formally been diagnosed, but it's interesting like hearing about binge eating and that sort of thing, and like hearing about the symptoms and hearing like it being described of like eating these large amounts of, whatever, you can kind of go on your own research, whatever, and like look up, whatever about binge eating, and like reflecting and being like, is this something that I've experienced? Bulimia and like just and anorexia and throwing up your food and that sort of thing, and like just thinking about how many girls, Black and brown girls I know that have dealt with body issues and these sorts of things, and it's just like I feel like it's the responsibility of people who have a privileged status to advocate for those who do not have that privilege. And that's just where I am. And I feel like especially if you are in a space where you are calling yourself a healer, or you are putting yourself in a space where you are advocating for formal wellness and women's wellness, but you never do anything about the greater community. You never do anything about intersection. That's a problem for me. And I think it's something that's growing to be a really big conflict of interest for me. And it's hard for me because on one end, I really want to be able to provide for myself abundantly, and I want to be able to provide for myself and for my family, and and a part of the reasons why I even connected myself to certain wellness institutions is because I wanted to be able to also provide access to friends of mine that necessarily wouldn't have had access to certain things. So, for example, this place I did infrared sauna, and I'm focusing on them because it's my most recent experience. It's most fresh in my mind. But basically, there's so many benefits to infrared sauna, which is essentially dry sauna. It's dry sauna, but there are certain technicalities that make this kind of sauna better than other kinds of saunas. But the fact that that's something that a certain group of people, like, it's geared towards a certain group of people, and it's such a luxury. And I feel like luxury, and it might be an American thing, it might actually be like a Western thing, and as far as like America is concerned, where we treat wellness as a luxury when it's basically a human right. And I think that when you have people, especially women, push forth an agenda of wellness, continuing to treat it as a luxury and continuing to perpetuate this elitism, it's just problematic. It's super problematic. I don't really know what can happen and what can change. I'm not sure the things that I can actually do to change this other than call it out. I'm doing my best now to connect with other women of color and essentially just sacrifice finances just to kind of be in certain spaces and hopefully just kind of gather community and kind of rally and kind of create this wellness spaces for each other. But yeah, it's really frustrating. It's frustrating for me as a doula because I have postpartum clients still, but I'm not taking on births. Again, like, it's a lot easier for me to dedicate and devote my time as a postpartum doula and see people an hour, 2 hours, here and there to help as a postpartum doula and check in, as opposed to like having to actively be there for births, because births tend to take a lot more energy. In the process of preparing for birth, it tends to take a lot more energy, at least for me, in the way that I practice. Getting access to certain clients that are able to pay a certain thing and pay for the proper exchange of energy. The fact that we don't have a healthcare system that supports that, where people who do have lower income can actually afford to have the care that they actually need. And I think that's the most infuriating part. It's not this thing of like, oh, people can't pay and I'm mad. It's people who need it the most. Women of color, Black women specifically, especially where I live in New York, are the most prone to dying in labor, dying because they didn't have people advocating for them, dying because they didn't have someone giving them the education so they could advocate for themselves. And it's like they don't have, not only does the system, the medical system, not give them the proper support to get to the access, you have people who are in place to give access and they choose not to, and they have more than enough. It's not a matter of they're getting by, so they, because thing is, like, I feel like especially in the Black community, and I guess that ties into like the lack mindset, right? Which I'm still like, I'm a healer, but I'm healing myself constantly. But this idea of lack, and if you feel like you won't have enough to give, then you kind of hoard for yourself and you don't really share, which kind of perpetuates, and it kind of just is a cycle and whatnot. But yeah, man, the healing community, and the wellness community, and like this white world, this white version of wellness, and how much it excludes Black and brown people, like, it's just not fair. It's not fair. And I'm tired of participating in it. And I guess it just comes down to making space for ourselves and making space for, and like kind of making our own table instead of like whining about needing a seat at the table. But at the same time, like, it's calling people to account. Like, how can you call yourself a wellness practitioner? How can you say that you care about freedom and that you care about equality, but you have taken no steps to actually go forth with that? I think about intersection a lot. I think about, and I dealt with a lot of passive aggressiveness, and I think about how I am forced to, not forced, but I guess in my mind I'm forced to have this perception that I need to monitor how I deal with passive aggressiveness, because naturally the way that I operate is that if you hit me with passive aggressive, like, hi, like that kind of thing, like, I want to punch you. Like, I want to, like, actually, like, put hands on you. And obviously you can't handle things like that because they will call the police on you and the police may kill you. And, like, that's just kind of how you have to look at shit. Sometimes everything's not worth a fight. But at the same time, you know, like, having to be conscious of, like, how I respond to passive aggressiveness because of the politics of capitalism and the corporate thing. And no matter what kind of field you're in, you know, having to navigate that toxicity, you know. I just wish that you know, we just had people truly advocating for other Black and brown folk. But yeah, that's pretty much it. I just kind of wanted to get that rant out. I've been wanting to kind of talk about it for a while. I didn't really say that much. I kind of just touched basically on the main things that have been bothering me. I might do another video on, like, my experience directly with eating disorders and kind of divulge that, because I've never really talked about body image for real. And especially since I have a daughter, and just kind of how my body's changed for real, and just my experience in high school. You know, I'll touch on that eventually. But that's it, man. Peace and love. Advocate for people as best you can when you can. Call out injustice when you can. And if you just need to vent and do that too. That's kind of what we have these platforms for. That's it. Peace.